Bob, you want to say hi or anything?
No, it's your show. Go ahead.
All right. Good evening, everyone. Welcome to an overview of the Bahamas. My name's Patty Cuba. I have co-presenters tonight. Marjorie is here and Alan is here, and we're very excited to talk to you about cruising in the Bahamas for the 2024-2025 season. So without further ado, we're going to get started. And yes, some folks have asked, will this be recorded? So you saw yes, and you'll see the slide. All right, so Marjorie, give me a thumbs up. Can you see that slide?
I can see the slide, yep.
All right, thank you. All right, so
Hang on.
Salty Dog Sailing Association is presenting an overview of the Bahamas. And welcome, and we're so glad all of you all are here.
I'll
We
try to bring up on the computer.
had about 60 folks registered, so this will be a great little webinar. So tonight's webinar is in 4 parts. First of all, welcome and just the introduction to winter cruising in the Bahamas and why it is such an awesome place to cruise. Part 2 is the Caribbean Rally. That's our first rally to the Bahamas. The folks leave Hampton, Virginia, and go to Abacos on or about November 1st. The third part is the January Jump. That is a new rally for the Salty Dogs this year. We'll depart West Palm Beach, Florida, and go to Great Harbor in the Berries on or about January 15th. And finally, we'll end with some Q&A before we finish the webinar so that the next webinar can start. So without further ado, welcome to the Bahamas. And let's think about why cruising in the Bahamas. Well, the first thing is it's close. It is a lot closer than our rally from Hampton to Antigua, but yet far away enough that you're in a whole new cruising ground, the water, the sky, everything about it. There are multiple reasons to cruise, and some of the folks on this webinar are experts in some of these. I just saw Phil join, for example. Lots of different regions. It's not like you go and you're stuck in a place. You can go into different regions and have different experiences. The beaches are just beautiful. The food is fantastic. It's really, really different than the USA typical fare. And then incredible wildlife. And I don't necessarily mean flying around. I mean under the water, just some incredible wildlife. There are about 2,400 islands and keys for you to choose from. Where to go, where to anchor. Every time I look it up, the number changes depending on your source, but you get the idea. There's a lot of places to poke around. So the one thing I think most people don't understand is the Bahamas is huge. It is tip to tip about 760 miles. That is a ginormous cruising ground. So all the way up from Grand Bahama, all the way down to Great Anagua, and then is the width of it. It is a very, very, very large cruising ground. You can't do it all in a season. You can't do it all in several seasons, as we'll show you tonight. So I did highlight the large regions in the Bahamas. If you go over here, some annotated. Some folks come in and go into the Abacos, and you could spend a season cruising right about there. But notice that is pretty north. That's even with West Palm and Fort Lauderdale. You could spend quite a bit of time cruising around here in Eleuthera. We all know this is a Nassau area. That's the busiest place in the Bahamas. My husband and I spent about 3 weeks poking around the Berries last year, and we didn't see half of what we wanted to see. Andros Island down here, home to some famous resorts. Cat Island, all in here, all of this. Long Island, Crooked Island, and then Turk and Caicos is down here, not for part of the Bahamas. And then this beautiful long chain called the Exumas, which I will spend some time on tonight. I did put a map in here so you could click on it and poke around and see all of the different regions. But let's take a look at some of them. The northern one, the Abacos, that is a great first cruising ground. It has the advantage of pretty easy sailing. Rarely do you need to pop outside. However, you look right up here, sometimes you do, that's the whale up there. But you do need to pop out of the ocean to get back in because it is just too shallow in here. But there are lots of awesome islands all along this chain in here. And of course, way down in here, beautiful scenery, great place to explore. The next one I mentioned, the berries. Again, we were here 3 weeks. You can't see it all in 3 weeks. Hopping in and out and visiting all of the berries. Some of you probably heard of Chub Key down here. Notice it does have an airport. But some of these are lesser known islands all up in here, but just as beautiful. And those of us who might be joining us in the January jump, notice this is Great Harbor, and it also has an airport. Also want to highlight the Exumas. The Exumas are my personal favorite cruising ground of anywhere in the Caribbean, including the Southern Caribbean. This is a great aerial shot because it does show you the length of the islands. And I'll never forget when Tribute was explaining the Exumas to me, and they said, you're going to be going in and out of cuts, which we'll elaborate on in a minute. This is what they meant, out to the ocean and back in, because you know, deep water in the Bahamas is 7 feet. No, I'm kidding. Deep water is 10 feet. Hi, dog. But there are many pop out and then pop back. Part of the Exumas, there's so much to see and do. There's the Chat and Show. I'm going to say conservatively the home of 300 plus yachts every winter. Chat and Show is the center of activity. There's yoga, there's volleyball, there's barbecues, and then of course there is the Chat and Chill. There is my favorite conch guy right there on the beach. Cervici is very, very famous there in the Bahamas, and he is quite gifted at cutting conch and making an excellent dinner for you. And that is a very vibey kind of town. Then just north of that is Stanley Yacht Club in the Exumas, sort of in the center. So it is a yacht club, right? Home to obviously lots of people from all over, as you can tell by the birdies hanging there. And that's a great hub. And I put these two up because they're easy to get to. They do have nice airports, sort of that center of activity for the Bahamas. They have Wardrobe Wells, which is further up the chain from Daniel Key. And as my children said this past season, it's just the best. It's just a beautiful, I could not find a picture to do it justice. This little area right here, where it's a great place in the Land and Sea Park. It is stunningly beautiful, but notice, there's no airport. There are no bars. I mean, you have a whale skeleton on the beach, and you have a little museum that you can go to, but it's just pristine Land and Sea Park. Quite different from Stanley Key or down there in the Exumas, lower Exumas. So going the other direction, so here we were up at Wardrobe Wells. Let's talk about the Raggeds. I personally have never been there. I've heard so much about them. Notice again a lack of grocery storage, airports. About Island Time, our boat, we're planning on spending February down there, down in the Raggeds, just exploring some pristine beaches, beautiful water. And I've heard oftentimes you'd be the only boat in an anchorage. So again, that's a great reason just to go that island chain of the Exumas. I've put this in here. I got this slide from Alan, who will share later tonight. This was his boat's path in 21-22, and he saw 50 islands over 5 months, cover 2,000 miles. I mean, that's just a great route. If you can see that circular all the way down to the Raggeds and then coming back up that Exuma chain. And his path looks like ours, up and down the Exumas as people came to visit. I think I did the loop 3 times this past year with just doing the Exumas with people flying in and out to visit us. So you can see all the different regions, so much to see and so much to do. So let's talk about it. If you're new to cruising in the Bahamas, some of the local lingo. You hear the saying island time. It's real. There's just no fast pace down there. Morning is morning and afternoon is afternoon, and we're not going to talk about 9:45 or quarter after 10. It's just morning. It's a much slower pace. The other than Nassau and Freeport, they're called the Family Islands, and that is they really do live that vibe of the slow island time. Another key word you're going to want to learn is called a rage. That is when the swell is really dangerous in between the cuts, and I have a slide on that. A key, so some of your islands and then lots of keys. The cut is that water that goes between the islands. And then my favorite Bahamian term is the conch. That is a beautiful shell. It is also delicious. It's a staple of food down there, fried or in ceviche. So I love, this is my favorite door in the Bahamas, at Farmer's Cay. Great place to visit. You'll sing during dinner with them. They'll have one of the best dinners ever. But if you look about their hours down there, they said they're open most days about 9 to 10, occasionally early as 7, sometimes 12 to 1, and so on and so on and so on. But I really think this sign captures the feeling of island time down there. If you have never been to the Bahamas, be prepared to pump the brakes because life lives at a much slower pace. So you're gonna cruise down there, and everybody's gonna want to come visit. So bring the family, bring the friends. Here's my children and some spouses as they're arriving in Staniel Key, and you can tell how happy they are. There's my son learning to play the conch, have it for dinner, and then you can lock the top off, and at sunset, everybody in the harbor plays the conch. Great way to know that the sun is going down. You can pet the sharks in the Bahamas. These are very friendly nurse sharks. You can pet the pigs in the Bahamas. There are a couple places to do that. It's a great thing. Entertains your guests for a solid half hour, and you get some great videos. Or you can just relax in some of the clearest water ever. Bring all kinds of floaties because you're just going to want to do that. You can make friends in the Bahamas. This little guy in Wardrobe Wells stayed with us for a few days and just swam off our stern, constantly in that flow of water. Just little baby nurse shark, just stopping by to say hi, very friendly. This is a famous place in the Exumas called the aquarium. If you can tell by that water, there's our son's girlfriend snorkeling down, and then that was me. The trick of you throw the bread in the water and all the fish come at you. You don't need to do that here. They're just going to come at you anyway. And yes, the water is that clear. And yes, there are that many fish. No filters on this picture. It's just that clear. So here's an example of a disappearing beach. So the tides come and go, and at low tide, it's a beach, and at high tide, a good 18 inches of water. So great place to play some volleyball. And then when the tide comes in, flip over and go into some resting, relaxing, or some paddle boarding. And some very comfortable 18 inches of water. I heard Cindy say she's bringing pets. We cruise with our hounds, Indigo and Abigail. It is much easier to get your pets into the Bahamas than into the Caribbean. The Caribbean is a good 6-week process. The pets is you just need your rabies, and then you can call, WhatsApp, or go on to Wellington Saunders webpage, and he'll get you, send him papers, fill out some information, and he's going to work with the government for a big fee of $50. It's a lot cheaper than the Southern Caribbean, and he'll work on getting your pet permit for you. Just to note, if you are planning to leave the Bahamas and go anywhere else, you do want to investigate if you would need international health certificate, because that is the lengthy process. But if you're just going to cruise the Bahamas, it's easy to do with a pet. You don't even need to see the vet when you get there. So once you get there, let's talk about navigation. Buy a pair of polarized sunglasses, buy an extra pair, and throw in a couple other pair just in case, because you're going to need them down there. not just to look good, but you will need them to help you read the water. The navigation aids are often missing. Some people are not Garmin and avionics people down there in the Bahamas. They either purchase the paper charts or Aquamap on your electronic devices. And don't forget, they're one of our sponsors. And so you can go sign up and get your Salty Dog discount from the Aquamap. So good slide again from Alan reading the watercolors. You'll get really good at this, but you can tell why polarized sunglasses is going to help. If it's dark blue, you're good. You're not going to see that often. But it's 50 feet or so on. And then medium blue, you start scaling back into turquoise, and then white, you're over that sandy bottom. Brown is usually a sign of coral, so we're going to avoid that. And then black is kind of hard. You don't know whether that's deep coral or grass. So you're going to navigate around there really carefully. We always do recommend if you're going into a new anchorage in the Bahamas, that you're going to want to go in during day so that you have that high sun overhead to help in navigation. This is a pretty decent aerial of Woodruff Wells, the land and sea park, as you can see that channel over to the right. And the boats are going to change during that tide, which is amazing. Because I think they're going to ask for your length. Don't lie. Because we told them we were a 45-foot catamaran and we had easily 9 extra inches before we hit ground. So you don't want to be a 50-foot boat in a 45-foot mooring hull. So excellent picture, aerial picture of Woodruff. So let's talk about those cuts. We have the islands and the water is going to come in and out the tide, right in between. And those currents can go really, really fast, up to 10 knots. And that's just not something the average yacht's going to handle. The ebb can be worse than the flood. And you definitely do not want to go into a current when you have wind against the current, or you're going to get that rage that was mentioned earlier. So put this in there. If you're a predict wind person, you're going to want to upgrade to where you can get your currents map. This over here on the right is a nice screenshot I took of, here's that exumus chain. And you can see that water would be rushing in. So you do not want to be going that way, particularly if the wind is against you. So that's a great, you just go right here to the currents map. You can zoom in or not and get all your details. And it will also, and then you can toggle back to the wind. Weather, east, just like other places. The fronts coming down affect the Bahamas. The colder winds will persist after the front comes through. And then consider your anchorages. You do not want to be on a lee shore during the passage. And of course, Chris Parker is your friend. Read and follow him. So moving on to provisioning, I buy all my grains, pastas, and cans in the U.S. You do have a few big grocery stores in these places. Look at the difference between shopping in Georgetown and shopping down here in Samuel Key. You're not going to get a lot of provisions in these outer islands. So I did make a map, again, reminding you of those big places with the big grocery stores. Here's my boats all stocked up with the specialty snacks, sardines, pastas, and cans. So I'm going to end my section on why go to the Bahamas with this quote that I found from Colonel Hadfield. He sums it up. He says, from space, it's the most beautiful place on Earth. I think some of us would argue from the sea, it's the most beautiful place on Earth too. So at this point, I'm going to turn it over to Doug. Nope, I'm going to turn it over to Alan, who's going to talk about getting to the Bahamas with the Salty Dogs from the Caribbean route.
Hello, everybody. And I've got just a couple of slides here to talk about the fall rally down to the Bahamas. So Kathy can go on to the next slide. So this is a group of 20 boats that went in 2021. We had a pretty even match between monohulls and cats. A lot of times people think, oh, you know, I've got a monohull, I can't cruise the Bahamas. And it's a great place with a mono. You just read the charts and pay careful attention, and you're good to go. Next slide, Kathy. The route is pretty straightforward. a lot of times the boats that are going to the Bahamas and the boats that are going to the Caribbean leave at the same time, and take similar routes to begin with, going down the coast of Virginia, and then at Cape Hatteras, making a slight turn and crossing the Gulf Stream at a right angle. And then once across the stream, it's pretty much due south. Now, some years, we in 2020 stopped in Beaufort, which was helpful because there was just enough of a weather window to get around Cape Hatteras. And we sat out for, oh, I don't know, it was blowing 40 or 50 knots for a day or so. And then we had no wind for crossing the Gulf Stream, and then a great beam reach all the way down to the Bahamas. So that's an option. Last year, I think a couple of boats did that last year, just the way it worked out. And distance is about 600 miles from Hampton, and 500 of that is from Hatteras down to the Abacos. Now, some people have insurance restrictions that require them to stay within 250 miles of the coast. And that is possible to do if instead of taking that straight route, you kind of just bend it in a little bit. You can keep within 250 miles of the coast. So that's something to keep in mind if you're one of those people that have that insurance restriction. Next slide, Kathy. I put this together. This is a sort of a more sophisticated version of a pilot chart. This was 10 years worth of satellite data collected for the winds for the first 2 weeks of November. And so it basically shows kind of what to expect in terms of the average wind strength and directions. You can see that crossing the Gulf Stream, so the typical winds are in the 20s coming out of the north. And then once you get through, the winds sort of change and start to become northeasterly. And then as you get down to the Bahamas, they're sort of east-northeast. And just a couple, as I mentioned, in 2020, we had the whole rundown to beam reach, and it was in the 20, I think we sort of ended up in the 30s. So it was a really fast run. And then the next year, we had almost no wind at all. We had wind across the Gulf Stream, and then the rest of it was all motoring. Next slide, Kathy. So I just want to highlight what Kathy said earlier is, we spent 4 seasons in the Bahamas and literally covered thousands of miles. And I still feel like there's a lot more that we've missed out on and haven't explored. And so it's a place you can spend a lot of time at if what you want to do is to just, see places and explore that you may not see, maybe 1 or 2 other boats. But if you want to see lots of boats and hang out where the party scene is, you can go to Georgetown. And as Kathy mentioned, you'll probably find 300 or 400 boats there in sort of the January, February timeframe. So it's a very beautiful place. I highly recommend either going down with the fall rally or the January jump. I think it's a great opportunity of some place to go visit that's close by. So Kathy, you can go on to Doug.
Hello. Am I on, Kathy?
Yep, you're good, Doug.
Okay. My wife, Marjorie, was going to fill in for me. I just got out of the dentist chair moments ago, so I'm glad to be here. Go on to the next slide, if you would. So the Salty Dogs are going to be doing a new rally this year, the January jump. And there's several reasons you might want to consider it. One is we're going to leave later. So if you want to spend the holidays in the States, the timing might work better. And, the rally is kind of a bigger offshore passage. So if you're not feeling up to that yet, this may be right for you as well. We're going to do a lot of preparation. Part of that will include talking about how to get to Florida. So the rally will start from Florida, but we understand a lot of people will be coming from points north. So we'll have a lot of pre-rally support, and that'll include all sorts of things. Some things Kathy touched on briefly, and a lot more detail. We're going to leave from West Palm Beach in Florida, so that's kind of far enough south to be a good departure point, but not getting down into the Miami Lauderdale area where things can be pretty crazy in January. Obviously, we've got to cross the Gulf Stream, and I'll talk a bit about that. And our initial landfall is going to be Great Harbor in the Berry Islands. And my wife and I think we've made landfall in Great Harbor 3 times. I think it's going to be a good spot for the rally. And then the rally will have at least a portion of the people will continue together on beyond the Berry Islands down to the Exumas. But if you want to go your own direction, the Berries are a great place to start. Next slide. So West Palm Beach is a very typical departure point for people headed to the Bahamas. And usually you would clear in either in Grand Bahama at West End or Freeport, or maybe continue across the banks and checking in the Abacos. We're not going that direction, but still it's going to be a good staging point for us. There's a good inlet there. If you have a tall mast or deep draft, no problem with fixed bridges or depth. There's plenty of room to anchor. There's tons of services, fuel, grocery, pharmacy. There's a great library there, West Marine, hardware, airport. If you've got crew or friends flying in, there's 2 public docks for dinghies. There's a nice farmer's market once a week. It's a fun place to be, and it's a good place to hang out if we've got a bit of a weather delay. And next slide. And then Great Harbor Key is in the Berry Islands, at the northern end of the Berry Islands. A lot of people spend seasons in the Bahamas and never get to the Berries at all. But it's really a nice place to go. There is a marina there, but the depth getting into the marina is limited. You could probably get in with 5.5 feet, maybe 6 feet on a tide. But outside the marina, there's a really expansive anchorage with great anchoring in sand and protection for the prevailing winds. The customs experience there is usually good. We had one that was a little bit rough, but it was COVID, and so I don't blame them too much on that. But I think it's going to be a good place to bring a large group in. And from there, you can start exploring the Berry Islands, or it's just a 1-day daylight sail to the Nassau area, and then another daylight sail down to the Exumas to continue on that way. A lot of us have Starlink now, but if you're still relying on cell phones for data, one important point is you can get Alive SIM cards there, which is there's 2 cell phone carriers in the Bahamas, and Alive is the carrier that has the preferable data plans, and you can pick one up there. And it's a good introduction to the family islands. As Kathy mentioned, the people are friendly, the way of life is very laid back, and it's very different than if you go visit Nassau or Freeport, somewhere busier. Next slide. So why this route? Well, part of the Salty Dog mission is to facilitate offshore passages. So, a lot of people spend seasons in the Bahamas and they never sail at night, right? You can get there with just day hops, but we wanted this to be the rally to be more than that. And although our rum line is only about 130 nautical miles, this route, offers several challenges, and I'll talk about those in a minute. Also, Southeast Florida is busy in January, and finding a good place to stage a rally is difficult. It would be great if we could all, stage out of a marina, but that's just not happening in Southeast Florida in January. And then Great Harbor, as I mentioned, is going to be a good spot for a group arrival. Okay. So the challenges, well, we've got the Gulf Stream. and we've got the Gulf Stream again. The current of the Gulf Stream and the sea state that current can produce when opposed by wind is a big deal. You can't just take off every day and make the crossing safely. Also, the wind direction and speed can cause some other problems. And if you've never been to the Bahamas, then sailing on the banks may be a new experience and something you kind of need to wrap your head around and get used to. So we'll talk about each of those in a little more detail here. So first, we're kind of starting with the current here. We've got to cross the Gulf Stream, and the Gulf Stream will be flowing along the coast of Southeast Florida, northbound, and the center of the stream is typically around 3 knots. So we can't, you can't just set off on a run line to the southeast. It's not going to work. You need to cross the Gulf Stream, either perpendicular or, a little more conservatively letting it set you to the north as you cross it. So if we want to go to the southeast, how do we do that? Well, there's several routes you could choose. You could come out of Palm Beach and head due east and cross the stream immediately. And then from that point, you could sail down the west coast of Grand Bahama, cut to the south across the current in the Northwest Providence Channel, and then kind of take a run line down to the Berry Islands. Or you could stay tight to the coast and avoid the Gulf Stream and sail along the coast, maybe a mile offshore or less, down as far as, say, Miami. And then at that point, head across the Gulf Stream. If you're that far south, you would want to make sure that you come out of the Gulf Stream a little north of Bimini. There's a bank there called the Moselle Bank. You would want to leave that to your starboard. But as you pass the Moselle Bank, you would cross onto the banks, the Grand Bahama Bank. And most of that distance from the Moselle Bank to Great Harbor has depths of 20 to 30 feet, and you can sail most of that even at night, although the last bit you would need some daylight. Or you could take some middle route. You could turn somewhere prior to Miami, and depending on wind and your boat speed and whatnot, you might take a more perpendicular path or a path that sets you up to the north a bit. But in those cases, you would kind of end up at the west end of the Northwest Providence Channel and could sail a deep water route till you arrive pretty close to Great Harbor and get onto the bank just at the end. Okay, Kathy. So the Gulf Stream is flowing to the north fast. And if you have a north wind opposing that, the waves become very steep. And, depending on conditions, those waves can range from uncomfortable to uncomfortable and hard to make progress with to just plain dangerous. So this chart is a little hard to look at, but what this is a wind rose, and the direction is the direction of the wind. The color is the strength of the wind. So blue is a light wind, and then yellow into orange into red is increasing strength of wind. And the radial distance is the percentage of days that have that wind component. So you can see there's a big chunk of yellow out of the northeast. There's a lot of days where you've got a significant wind out of the northeast. So I've kind of arbitrarily drawn a squiggly red line here just to give you an idea that there is a significant fraction of days where the north wind component is going to cause the seas to really pile up in the Gulf Stream and make going, somewhere between difficult and inadvisable. So that's one thing to keep in mind in terms of planning and departure. And then if we can move on to the next slide, Kathy.
Oh, great.
There, back one. Okay, here's the same wind rose, but now let's look at it from a different perspective. We've got those days with a significant north component to the wind, but we've also got a lot of days where the wind is fairly strong out of the east through the south, and we're trying to go to the southeast. So there's another significant percentage of days where you've got a headwind. and maybe it's more headwind than you want to, bash your way into to get down there. So another percentage of days that maybe call for waiting. So, the point of these two slides is that if you're sitting in West Palm, it's not like you can just take off any day you want and easily cross over to the Bahamas. It's not unusual to have a bit of a weather delay. Next slide here. So I know people, or I know at least of people, that have waited for months for that good day, that perfect day to cross the Gulf Stream. And you can wait an awfully long time. Really what you need to do is to take an approach where you evaluate the weather and you decide what's going to be safe for your crew and your boat. And, you don't wait on a perfect day, because the perfect day may be 2 months away. We'll have Chris Parker as our weather advisor to give you some, forecast advice. But just to set an expectation, even though this is a short passage crossing over, it's not just an easy one that, we can necessarily say we're going Tuesday. Okay. All right, Kathy. All right, the final challenge is, particularly if you take that south route, or sooner or later, you're going to be sailing on the banks. So if you pull up a satellite view of the Bahamas, you'll see there's two giant areas of shallow water, the Great Bahama Bank and the Little Bahama Bank. And water depths there range. In some areas, you might have 20 to 30 feet of water. In other areas, you might have an average depth of 10 feet of water or 8 feet of water. This snippet from a map here is an area called the Yellow Banks, and it's on the typical path that people take from the Nassau area down to the Exumas. And you can see the water depths here. You've got 10 feet and 8 feet and 11 feet and 15 feet. And all those red marks are coral heads. So some areas in the banks, if you plan properly, you can make some transits day or night. But other areas like here, you really need to transit in daylight with reasonably good visibility, not first thing in the morning looking into the sun, but with the sun high enough in the sky that you can read the water and you can avoid these isolated coral heads. And depending on your draft, coming through some of these areas, you may even want to have someone stationed up on the bow. Okay. So that's just, a brief overview of the January jump, as well as the Bahamas in general. Marjorie and I will be going back. I think this will be our 8th trip to the Bahamas. And, it's such a beautiful cruising ground. There's so much to do there, so many places to explore. We're looking forward to it, and we hope you join us.
All right, thank you, Marjorie and Doug, and thank you, Alan. So you've heard two options on how to get there. You could go in November with the Caribbean Rally and break off and go to the Bahamas, or you could go in January, and that one goes from Florida over to the Bahamas. But once you're there, no matter how you get there, don't forget, we'll probably have another Salty Dog and Zuma rendezvous. This is a picture from last year, Boo Boo Hill. And there's our little sign we made. Everybody's got to paint on wood and put it up there. So that's always an option, no matter how you get there. This is one of those fancy aerial shots with a drone of a bunch of us getting ready for an event on the beach. You can see the 2024. And then here we are playing Hungry Hippo with beach balls on the beach during the rendezvous. So the Bahamas rendezvous is always a good time. One of the last weeks of the cruising season. So again, thanks. Let's go to the Bahamas, and we left a little bit of time to answer some questions. So let me stop this and pull up that chat. I saw a bunch of stuff coming in. Alan, will you cover at some point? Can you say where to leave your boat if you need to go home for a week or two?
Sure. You want me to do that now?
Yeah.
So obviously it depends, as Kathy mentioned, the Bahamas is a big place. If you're in the Exumas, probably one of the better choices is down in the Georgetown area. And I'm having a senior moment remembering the name of the marina there. But it's where the Fire Festival was many years ago. And it's a great Emerald Bay. And I've left my boat there for a couple weeks when I've gone back. It's a short hop to the airport. So that's a really easy one if you're down in the Georgetown area. There is a number of marinas in Nassau that you can leave, and it's a quick hop over to the airport from there. In particular, I've left my boat a couple of times at Palm Key Marina, which is on the east side of Nassau, and then just hop over the airport. And other options are Spanish Wells. Again, there's a couple of marinas there that you could leave your boat at, and it's a pretty short hop over to the airport. And then finally, I up in the Abacos would be another spot if you're that far north. So there's options.
All right, thanks, Alan. Chuck asked about changing from the Caribbean Rally to January jump. Every year we have folks that join the Caribbean Rally, and if for some reason they can't go. So Tatcha works with those folks. If it's too late, there is a small cancellation fee. But it's very easy to change and say, no, I'm gonna go on the next one. So yeah, that's a possibility. Doug, will you answer Rob's question about staging your boats in Florida before the January departure?
Yeah, I'd be happy to. Southeast Florida over the, kind of Christmas time frame is difficult, particularly for catamarans. So if that is your plan, start working on it now. There are places you can get into, but availability is definitely limited. There are some marine, and also I would say if you're thinking you're gonna leave the boat or whatnot, don't focus too closely on the immediate vicinity of West Palm Beach. Broaden your search out a little bit, particularly to the north. Some of the marinas, if you talk to them, they'll say they are already booked full. Some marinas tell you you're calling us way too early and we won't even think about that for a couple of months. So I would say cast your net wide, but start now. I do know of a couple spots right now that you definitely could book for, kind of a mid-November till close to the rally, even for a large cat. But things do fill. I could give some specifics, but I don't know. Everybody's situation and dates change. It varies. So it's the best advice I can give you is just start now. Don't be discouraged. I recall 3 years ago when we went down, Marjorie and I made about 45 inquiries. The other thing too is if you get something that works for you, but it's not ideal, go ahead and book it. Pay attention to their cancellation policy, obviously, but keep working, because I think that year that we made 45 inquiries, we traded up like 3 times to, better and better reservations as they became available, and get on the wait lists, because, where we ultimately ended up, we started on a wait list.
Yeah, and I know Doug has 4 slide decks queued up to help newcomers or vets who have questions, that as we do get into, particularly in the January jump, you can roll those out and you can watch those webinars. There was a question about crewing. Some couples do go straight from Florida to the Bahamas by themselves because it is not that much of a distance, but please do note, if you are going to have crew and they're flying into West Palm, which is very easy to do, you need to make sure that you factor in the weather window. Because although the proposed date is January 15th, as both of our other speakers have said, we are very dependent on this route on weather. And so it's not for sure that we'll be leaving on January 15th. We could be waiting based on that Gulf Stream and on the weather. But we'll follow Chris Parker's advice and go at the best time for each captain to make that decision.
Let me add to that, Kathy. I was speaking to Chris the other day, and Brendan and I have done 4 seasons in the Bahamas. Those windows are often short, and there's not a lot of warning. And I'll reinforce what Doug said, and that is that if you wait for a perfect window, you're never going to leave. It's kind of a joke, the folks that are down in the Keys, and every day they're like, what do you think? Is today the day? And they say, maybe tomorrow. And sometimes they call Marathon Chicken Harbor, and that they wait all season and never go. But you can go, and chances are you're going to end up motoring into a light southeast. That's what Chris tends to recommend. And then as the wind clocks around, you reach the banks and you're good to go. I've also left a boat up at the Florida-Georgia border in St. Mary's. There's a yard there you can haul out pretty inexpensively. And there is also one yard in Fort Pierce that's just north of the opening bridge that I talked to the other day. They don't have much room. It's just, I've forgotten the name of it, but it's just up just on the left. But their approach depth is about 6 feet. When you're thinking about where you might leave the boat, keep in mind that a lot of the inlets on the Florida coast are terrible, and there's only a couple that are really safe, even for a shallow draft boat. So keep that in mind. And of course, if your mast is over 64 feet or so, you've got to make sure that you can make it under those bridges.
Yep. All right. Any other questions for the group before we call it a night?
Yes, Cindy here.
Gotcha.
Yeah, so if I wanted to bring my boat down and stage it, we have, and part of the rally too for the January jump, can we leave November 1st from Hampton and utilize Chris's weather forecasting to get around Cape Hatteras? Because some of us, I have to go on the outside, I'm too tall. So if I wanted to leave with the group and then just bebop straight down to somewhere like St. Augustine.
You
So I hadn't
can,
heard that conversation there, Cindy. You're always creative. It's definitely possible to think about that, but remember, not everybody. It's not every year, as Alan said, that they do leave Hampton and pop around Hatteras.
Right.
So it's always good if you hire Chris Parker on your own if you're coming down, so that he can be pushing you down the coast. Bob, Alan, you want to add
Yeah,
anything?
Cindy, why don't we talk offline about that? One of the challenges is if you sign up for the rally and use the weather, if you don't go all the way and you stop, you have to you keep moving or
Oh,
or you have to withdraw. But the challenge of what you're proposing, if you went across the Gulf Stream, went down, and then you have to cross the Gulf Stream again, and that's fine, but something to think about in terms of where you might end up. And also, if you were to go down on the outside, you recognize that you're a long way from land when you have to cross back over again, maybe around Charleston, for example.
yeah.
And I will note that having done the ICW, because our boat
Yeah.
is under 65 feet, it gets really cold if you drag out that trip. Leaving once you're east of the Gulf Stream, it's a lot warmer, but west of the Gulf Stream, it can be really chilly.
Yeah, I don't have a choice. I have a tall mast.
No, I get that, but
I
what I
know.
mean is,
Yeah, I know. Maybe I'll leave
I
earlier.
get it. It's
Leave
really
early, like
cold though
7.
on the ICW in November. Even if you can't do it, it's still cold, let me
Yeah.
tell you.
Okay, thank you, Bob.
Thanks,
Kathy.
Cindy. All right, so thank you, Bob, and Doug and Marjorie and Alan. Bob, anything you want to summarize with? Because we had a great group here tonight.
Well, I just want to thank you, Kathy, and Doug and Marjorie and Alan for putting this together. This is, I think it's an exciting option for those of us that can't be down in the Bahamas for the entire season. It's a terrific area, and I think if you do it. You'll seriously enjoy it. But I agree with Doug. You better jump on it because marinas are very crowded. And I called a few the other day, and they either weren't taking reservations yet or they were already full. But thanks again. And unless there's something else, I'll stop the recording. Kathy, it's your call.
Nope, I'm good. Thank you, everybody. And any questions, give us a shout out through email. Have a great night.
Take care, everyone.
Thank you.
Thanks,
Thank you.
everyone.